Thanks for tuning in to Look at My JPEG, the podcast that discusses NFT, DeFi, and NFT financialization. This is your host, Xerox Jose, the founder of nftperp. The reason why I want to do this podcast is because there's just not enough people talking about NFT financializations. In this podcast, you can expect us to invite guests that are builders, founders, even investors that are deep in the NFT financialization space. We'll discuss their story, what they're building, and how you can get involved. So thanks for tuning in.
Owen, welcome to the show.
Hello, sir. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming on. I think before we start with, by the way, everyone, this is Owen from Sudoswap. We're super excited to chat with them because I can't believe we have you guys on a 30-second episode. I feel like we should have had you on like on the third or the first one. But nonetheless, we're glad to get you guys finally on. I thought it'd be fun to do like a quick rounder. Like a quick question and answer to kind of break the ice a little bit, and then we'll get into the more detailed questions that I have for today. How's that?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, super quick question, super quick answer. Number one, crypto big butts or Milady?
Man, I know I'm probably gonna get some flack. I think like there's literally ladies in like this space, so like it's probably like not too big of a contest, right? Like who's still here? It's gonna be the people who are more native.
Sorry, I didn't get an answer though.
Oh yeah, so I yeah, like obviously like I would have to lean Milady,
Okay.
right? Just like looking at the makeup. There's like 4 people in the space and 2 of them have like Romelia PF.
That's fair. That's fair. Pudgies or doodles?
Well, again, like pudgies, right? I don't think these are difficult questions. So people have CDB and like doodle bags. I'm sorry for fudding.
Oh, fair enough. Okay, NFT lending, risky or good?
I think it's good. I think it's fun. I think that I think that like there's totally ways to contain the risk, and the number of like NFT-fi projects trying is sort of testament to that.
Big debate in the space, royalties. What are your thoughts on royalties?
So I think this is going to be like a much more extended answer. I think that TLDR is like there are a lot of positions to have. One I think like quite defensible position is like let the asset issuer decide. They're the ones that have like coded up the asset in the same way that like shitcoins can code up like transfer fees. You can always just like block whatever contract you're writing to do the transfer if they want to. And then like there's stuff like the ladies or pudgies that might have collections with like low or zero royalties set up designed to be liquid anyway. And if so, that's probably where like the brunt of the trading is going to be.
Okay, let's unpack this later on.
Yeah.
NFTs on L2?
I don't think they've had their moment yet. I feel like they're kind of trying with base. There's some cool stuff on there. But there's nothing that's like it's really standing out yet, right?
Yeah, I'm very uninformed about NFTs on L2s, except for maybe Arbitrum. Outside of that, I'm very, very uninformed. Let's talk about this. Double click on it later.
Yeah.
Real world assets and NFTs. Good or bad?
Ooh. I think like obviously good, right? We just want like we need more capitalization in general. Like total market cap across NFTs is down. Anything that can like bring more interesting types of assets on chain, good. But I don't know about like the luxury goods stuff in particular. I was talking to someone, it's like, what are you gonna do? Like flex the NFT of your Rolex? Like on your Apple Watch versus like just having the Apple, like the Rolex itself.
Well,
I
people
don't know.
have,
I don't know about that one.
there has been like taken with
Yeah.
Rolexes, but then you can just do that, like,
Yeah.
like at a pawn shop down the street, right?
Yeah. I don't know. I'm sure there are people who are like really deep in this that can educate me more. So I think jury's out. Just like,
Okay, next time we'll invite one of the oh, I think there is a guy. His name is Jake, CEO at watches.io. We'll have to invite him on and get him talk about watches as NFTs.
mm, okay.
Okay, so the next couple of questions are more like personal. What's your favorite track
All right.
when you're coding?
So I used to be like a really big EDM person. So, like if people know taiko, like, like electronic ambiance music, and a
Okay.
very, very stereotypical coder about,
Yeah, it's like the
yeah, yeah.
like summer house vibe, right? Well, like tropical house.
Uh, m- Maybe I don't know all the like the different like house trance names. So if you know the artist, then it's
Oh,
just
wait, no,
like
Taiko.
it's like beeps and boops.
I like Taiko.
Yeah, TYCHO.
Yeah,
Okay, okay, yeah,
Taiko's
yeah,
good.
yeah. Yeah. And then Bonobo as well, like all kind of in that genre.
Okay, I think that might. Um, and next question: what was your first NFT purchase?
Ooh, that's a good one. I think probably the first big one was honestly like Hashmask.
Okay.
Is like what kicked off like all the bonding curve mania.
Yeah. And that's like just before the board apes, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Um. All right. Last question: what was your first rug?
Ooh, man, there's so many. I'm trying to think like probably like it was probably like some PFP that ended up just like not delivering. Um, Too many of those.
Yeah, and they usually just end up in your wallet, like dust, and it reminds you how shitty and straight you are.
Ooh,
That's how it.
yeah.
Um. Okay, cool. Well, thanks for the quick round of questions. I appreciate it. I think that was pretty fun. Uh, let's talk about you. Let's talk about Sudoswap. Maybe for those that are, I think you guys have been around for quite some time, and maybe it would be good for everyone to know like your origin story. How did Sudoswap like came out? What was the early version? What did you guys do before that? And then we'll have more questions after that.
Yeah, yeah. So before I started working on all of this, I was working on an NFT project myself. So that's like the 0x Bonds NFT project. Was messing around with like GAN and generative stuff a little bit before it got super cool. So project launched like late 2020. So, like slightly predating um, some things like apes, whatever. Uh, from there, some people who had the NFTs wanted to trade them with each other, and as a dev, I started looking at ways to make that happen, and that was how the first version of Sudoswap came to be. So if people remember, during like the original time when like art blocks got really popular, there's like an OTC site, so you could like pick the stuff that you have, things that you want, and then you like send a code to your friend who can accept. So that's still live today, but obviously like OTC, I think, sort of tracks with rough market volume. So still live. Repo is actually open source, so you can run the whole thing yourself if you want. And it's built off of 0x behind the scenes. So good project, good people. This is before Seaport. Then from there, some people um, were often doing it, like normal sales on there, like Weave was on one side, was thinking about, like marketplaces in general. There's some things that were hard to do back on OpenSea in the day, like if you wanted to list a bunch of assets. And then a lot of my thinking there eventually led to like the first version of the Sudoswap marketplace, the like the AMM stuff behind the scenes.
Yeah, I mean, I think I first came across when you guys were still running, doing the OTC, and it's free to use, right? Like you guys don't charge a fee.
Yeah, because like 0x doesn't have a fee. It's actually kind of gross because you're using 0x, it's like a little gross to add something on top. So it's just out there as like a public good.
Yeah. Well, kind of like almost like a front end in a way, but obviously there's not more intricacy that goes into it. Um, what was the? I'm curious, like, what was the aha moment for you, in terms of moving on from the OTC model to building the pseudo AMM?
Yeah, so I think like definitely a big inspiration was like early stuff in NFT liquidity, like NFTX, Muse, their NFT 20 stuff. Because that was sort of the first time that you had, like NFTs liquid, where before that it was just like, okay, Rarible and OpenSea. So definitely like seeing those was like big point of inspiration. And then the other thing was like when you're sort of adding liquidity to these platforms, you have to put up both sides, right? You have to like put up some ETH and some NFTs. And I think it was like, okay, well, if you're starting like a new project, maybe you just have NFTs, right? And you like don't want to put that much on the ETH side. So it was like the lopsidedness first that got me thinking. And I was like, okay, but if you have a bunch of people that want to do lopsided different directions, how can you account for that? And then sort of the idea that I eventually ended up running with was like, okay, you can just let each person, pick their own like deposit ratios, and then you can just sort of sort across all of them on the app side.
Yeah, well, what's interesting is like it's what you got, at least like the V1 of this million man, it's you're allowing people to express different liquidity asymmetry in terms of the bid and ask type of assets, and you're allowing people to express their um price increments, their type of curve, and this could be done in different pools. And the interesting thing is like you guys are doing all this on chain, whereas protocols that perhaps like interact with Seaport, a lot of the data storage and matching and whatnot are done not on chain.
Yeah. So that's like where I think there's a lot of big trade-offs, right? Like if you go the Seaport model, then there's a lot of things that you get as conveniences, like it's easier for people to list because they can just sign. And then the trade-off, of course, it's like harder to plug in for, like lending or anything else.
Yeah. Um, Outside of that, like what you guys have had moved on since then to a V2 model. Give us a quick overview of how different V2 is with V1. What are the major changes and upgrades for people that are using Sudoswap?
Yeah, so there are probably like three things that I think are neat, especially from like maybe like a coder perspective, and sort of like that is going to often be like the default perspective that I have. So the first one is support for 1155s. So we sort of had like a small open edition meta, and even now, there's like some game assets, obviously like big shout out to Peril that are still doing quite well. And then, like general marketplace support for those hasn't been great. You can now set up listings or bids for 1155s with like pools as the tech behind the scenes in the V2. The second one, of course, which is again like a lot more pertinent now that like OpenSea is talking about removing the operator filter and like enforcement being wildly different across the book, is that you have like a on-chain enforcement guarantee if you're using the V2 contracts. The creator fees get paid out because they just read what's from the contracts and then adjust the quote that users get appropriately. Um, and the third one, of course, is the trait pool stuff. So if you just want to make bids for, like a certain type of asset, like just like alien miladies or something like that, you can do that. And you don't have to worry about like your order being filled by some other trait.
Yeah, that's a big thing, right? That's a big moment because I feel like when when NFTs first came, and even for you guys with the NFT AMM, like the struggle is always like this seems to mostly serve for range and AMMs, and it doesn't really address what perhaps like mid tier or high tier um rarities of assets in the collection. So yeah. path up you guys to being able to solve that like mechanically.
Thank you. I think that people often ask about like what to do with non-floor assets, but I think that I'll be the first to say that I don't think there's like a good solution out there, right? You have like several different competing ways of doing valuation, like waterfall or upshot, or even, some of these like fractionalization approaches. But I think that I don't think there's been something that really like solves the barrier, especially when stuff like for a while, like the Spirit Azukis were like 80 ETH, right? And it seems like the general barrier there was just you had to like be a whale to buy one. I don't think there's been like a good approach to fix like the sort of like the upfront capital barrier yet, or like one that's seen a lot of use.
Well, yeah, because the valuation becomes like a very exclusive right to determine the value of it by a group of people, right? Yeah. Um, yeah, that's an interesting thought. But then, like, what are your thoughts on like, and like if NFTX did a multiplier on mint and redeem for higher tier NFTs in the collection? Like, would that effectively allow you to have a lower entry on a higher tier NFT?
Hmm. So one of the things that they do have, right, is like you can get fractional tokens for like NFTs that meet certain attributes. Like I remember they had one for like 4 attribute punks or like 5 attribute punks. Um, I feel like the multiplier fee would probably have to be like dynamic in some way, right? Otherwise you risk like underpricing it.
Yeah, exactly. And then the liquidity fragmentation is also like a bit of a challenge. Um,
Mm.
if you're fractionalizing a specific set of token ID within a collection, and you're not, and it's total different token type, it's different ERC20 token compared to the flow ones, then the liquidity don't really merge. It becomes a subset of fragmented liquidity in its own pool.
Mm.
Yeah. That's interesting. So with the new upgrades on, I know earlier you mentioned we should um unpack a little bit more on royalties. So with the addition of V2, the collection support or royalties, what are your thoughts on royalties in general? What made you, you know, upgrade the V2 to support this? What are your thoughts in general? How do you think different ecosystem participants should think about royalties from a collector's perspective, from a marketplace perspective, from a creator's perspective, or even like NFT lending and borrowing protocols? Like, what are your thoughts on royalties in general?
Yeah. So I think that there are a few, I think, core motivations. So the first one, it's funny that you bring up like lending and borrowing, because my thinking there was actually like, if you want NFT composability, then I think one of the ways that you want to like sell this for creators is like a good guarantee that on the base layer, you still have, like royalties paid out either on like liquidation or like certain types of, like base layer execution. And to that end, like having, like a robust marketplace protocol with that guarantee, I think makes it easier to stomach like some of the weirder things people are doing in NFT file land, because you can be like, okay, yeah, it's like wrapped or it's being used as collateral, and maybe like, you're not getting kind of the interest payment, but on liquidation or things that, really touch the market, right? Like it's going through this route that is like the route that you're used to. So that was actually like one thing in thinking about like broader composability that was a motivation. And then the second one, of course, is that like, originally with the V1 launch, a lot of my thinking was around liquidity, and obviously like NFTX and like NFT20 were sort of like the examples to go from that. We're like focusing on bringing like value back to the LPs, and the goal being that, like, ideally collections could also LP. And I think that, like the initial result is that, many people don't really want to, or not necessarily don't want to, but like it's difficult to like engage with thinking about liquidity provisioning. Um, and especially in like a world where like creators are increasingly dealing with like access control, then, you know, like things that end up like bypassing it or like paradigms that they don't want to engage with, right, they can just block them. And this has happened in the past where like certain pools have had their stuff blocked, or people like, oh, I can't withdraw. And then, you know, like then you end up just being like, well, you have to go talk to the asset issuer and like work something out. Um, and that's not like an ideal position to be in, right? Like you don't want to be playing whack-a-mole. So, you know, like the design wise, like, okay, how can we go back to the drawing board and like start from like a rather tenable position, which I guess in this case is just like enforcement by default, figure out, you know, like which collections do want to be liquid, and then sort of work backwards from there. So those are sort of the two motivations.
Yeah. So from a collector's perspective, sorry, a creator's perspective, like which project and collections have been way more adaptive, if you will, and supportive of this narrative of like, first of all, like providing liquidity for your collection, and two, leaning more towards like a DeFi centralized setup versus a centralized exchange, like the Blur, if you will, with Seaport type of model.
So I think it's definitely stuff that like show up in spaces around like these NFT fi circles, right? Like Remelios, Sappy Seals, like Penguins. I think these are all, you know, like sort of the like forefront of collections that are, you know, in these conversations and engaging.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, your point on, I think that ultimately when a collection like understands how the importance of liquidity in general, it provides a pretty clear signal for a lot of collectors and traders to understand like, okay, these guys care about like how the entry and care about the exits, and they care about like their ability to provide support for liquidity at different levels. And I think maybe some collectors out there don't really understand the importance of this. And personally, I think collections that do pay attention to it and have taken steps, integrating with different marketplaces and exchanges, will play a pretty big role in terms of like, the next NFT cycle. And this is my speculation.
Yeah, I think that there's definitely like a few different routes, right? Like one is I think um like Pudgy Penguins I think are like a very good example of how far you can stretch like it's almost like, ooh, okay, maybe a spicy hot take is like penguins are actually RWA, right? Because I think that they're definitely like an example of IP that is like really stretching as far as possible to like make all of the sort of like real world connections, and then, you know, hopefully like bring more of that value back on chain. So, you know, it's like almost like if you're buying a penguin, you know, there's like some nebulous claim to like real world things going on. So, you know, one is I think you can really lean in that direction of like having external factors. Um, you know, like for a lot of in-game assets, this is going to be, you know, like tied to the external game that, you know, might not be running on chain necessarily. Um, so I think this is, you know, like sort of one cycle of things that could end up being really big whenever the next run up is, because there are a lot of external catalysts. Or, you know, you go really deep on like the liquidity end of just like whether, you know, through some like degenerate Ponzi or just like because you have like liquidity cycling through you know, the collection sort of keeps velocity. And then these are ones that I think, you know, have done like a lot of provisioning either themselves or have worked with collectors to do so.
Yeah, I find that incredibly interesting because, Pudgy seems to have a super clear vision of where they are in terms of like the vertical and the like the features that they want to dominate. And but however, they're also very well positioned on a NFT finance and liquidity perspective within the ecosystem, where um, they're easy to get to in terms of having a conversation with them. They're open to providing liquidity on NFT AMMs, and they're open to work with NFT finance protocols to provide liquidity. Um, it seems like they're tapping into the best of both worlds in terms of like having a clear vision on what they need to do to drive this brand value, and also being on the forefront of like being NFT finance. Um, yeah, that's incredibly interesting. Maybe it's a good segue into like how you guys think about like NFT finance as a space in general. Like, I think NFT finance was sort of the promise of like NFT fi summer for maybe a little bit over a year now. And it seems like with a lot of the protocols that have come out, and Blend really coming in pretty hot and taking this space like by a storm, really like making a pretty big impact. Like, how do you guys think about like where Sudo fit into the whole narrative and its place in terms of like NFT finance?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that I'm thinking a lot about now, right, is still like the the creator royalty stuff. I think that there isn't a good sort of unified front, especially from like marketplaces that are trying to do like some degree of support. Uh, Obviously, I'm like not keen on having block lists or allow lists sort of end up as the end all be all. So a lot of that is on my mind. Also thinking about like what sort of collecting goes on L2s. I think like, a lot more open edition stuff, especially on like Zora chain base. Um, Obviously we've seen that like Zora is like quite profitable because you can sort of scale up on like the volume that comes with open edition mints. So I've been thinking about that to an extent, like issuance, like how does the pattern of collecting look like on different chains? Um, and I think that especially if you think that like the quantity is like the sticking point, then I think some of the NFT fi designs end up looking a little bit different, right? Because then you probably don't have as much like peer-to-peer stuff because volume is so high, and then like maybe peer-to-pool things um,
Mm,
end up working better in like low fee environments.
mm. Yeah, that's interesting, right? I feel like Ethereum has um in terms of NFTs, for some reason, like Ethereum just has this moat, where most of the high value projects and liquidity that on Ethereum, um, we've seen Solana, have a little bit of its heyday, with regards to higher floor price NFTs, and with I'm not gonna say who like migrating over to Ethereum, and maybe even Polygon and into Ethereum, like, and even like the other, a couple of collections have done that. Um, it's sort of consolidated almost like liquidity back to Ethereum and L1, which is incredibly interesting because here we are like complaining about gas fees. So what? And then like for some reason all the people that had money are still on L1 and collecting on L1, and like there's all these different features and like supposedly much better environment for high frequency trading or it's low gas costs and whatnot. They'll have it now too, but it just doesn't pick up traction for whatever reason.
Hmm. Yeah, I think it's interesting because like token market cap, for example, certainly isn't as like preferential to L1, right? There are like quite capitalized tokens on L2s.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, what if okay? So here's the question: if Sudo were to launch on L2, what would be the first one?
Ooh, that so I I want to I want to say base because base is where all the attention is at, but I think like realistically, because it's come out a bit earlier, some of like the RPC infra isn't as robust. So I think like a more honest answer is probably something like Arbitrum or Optimism, as they've
Mm,
been around the longest and have
yeah.
like some degree of NFTs on there. But there's no denying that like base is super hot right now.
So is that relative to it being a new and shiny object? Do you think it's a new shiny object, or do you think like it's here to stay and it has an edge over other protocols or L2s with regards to being in the NFT vertical?
I think that it has a good amount of staying power. Like Coinbase has pretty good reach, and I don't think like a lot of the Western side ever really got its like BNB moment. Um, maybe Base is where like a lot of the weirder experiments and things end up.
Yeah, a lot of ups and downs, right? They sure got their first big rug a couple weeks ago.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah. Uh, okay. So I think outside of that, like, I love to know like your thoughts on, um, like what's missing right now in NFT, like finance, NFT, like cycle in general. Like, what do you look forward to the most,
Mhm.
in the coming however months? It seems like NFT, volume has gone sideways a little bit. And,
Mhm.
obviously with Bitcoin recently retraced the entire candle of the SEC, uh, and the ETF, well,
Damn, man.
it doesn't seem too great. But hey, man, we're still here building, we're still shipping. But what do you think is missing? What do you think is
Yeah.
could be the next catalyst? When's we
So I'll give two answers. I think the second one's a layup. So the first one I think is I I want to see like especially with the L2 stuff, the thing that I'm personally excited about is, how much more we can like move things on chain. Right? Like can we even go like the same model, right? And just have like the entire order book on chain, I think is really interesting. Because then you can have smart contracts that just like act as takers, not just makers, which is pretty cool.
Mm.
So that's for me personally. I think the thing that, a lot of people have been asking for a while now, which I'm sure you're like quite familiar with, is, different degrees of getting synthetic or leveraged exposure,
Mm.
to like the blue chip assets. So, from a project that's, very focused on perps, I'm sure you have like a lot of thoughts on, where take that.
I think there's several routes you can do it with, and there has been different protocols that have come out with their iterations. Obviously, our NFT perp is an iteration of that, and we're pushing our V2 out pretty soon. We're pretty excited to launch this, and I think what I'm excited about is a pretty liquid way to arbitrage too. So we're focusing on
Oh,
synthetics, on perps. We love to
mhm.
be a spot protocol that can handle both long and short side. So on the perp end, we can do a lot of like arbitrage opportunities around it. And I think like
Ooh.
once you have that type of setup, um, volume and liquidity just gonna be unlocked, because of risk uh, is reduced when you have like two sides of the market being able to live with the other.
Ooh.
Yeah. So I don't know if you see any cool protocols doing margin trading with long with shorts, using AMMs, shoot your DM.
Well, too, well, too.
Okay. Oh, I've asked most of the questions that I wanted. Is there anything that I missed that you think the audience should know about that's relevant to Sudo?
I, I think, we covered the main things that have been top of mind for me. Yeah.
All right, sounds good. Well, appreciate you coming on to the pod. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. And yeah, thanks for taking the time to share your thoughts.
Likewise. And thanks to everyone who tuned in.
Yeah, thanks everyone. We'll keep you guys posted if any upcoming updates from our protocol at Sudos. And we'll see you guys again next week. So, talk to you soon. Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you for tuning in to Look at My JPEG Podcast. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your audio podcast from, give us a like, a subscribe if you like the content, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.